All right, as we continue into the Daniel passage, I'm going to read it to you. It's Daniel 2:20 and 21. It says, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Now, the reason this is so important, like Daniel, I mean, what a better example to use for teenagers as Daniel here, because Daniel was taken into captivity as a teenager, and he had remained faithful to God. And here we find Daniel at the point in his life where God is giving him the interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And so faithfulness to God by living under the authority of a government that is not godly in a place of captivity um, is a great example that even if you don't agree with the authorities that are set up over you, you can still live under them and be blessed by God. But it's important to look as we look in this passage. It says we're going to go over our questions. It says, what belongs to God? Wisdom and might. Um, what do you call someone who has the ability to change times and season? You call him God. Nobody else has the power to do that. Only God can establish governments and tear them down. There are seasons of people's life, and there are seasons of governments. They only last so long. The only government that's going to last forever is God's kingdom. And question number 3 there says, what does God remove and set up? I already went over that. Um, what does God give? Wisdom to the wise, knowledge to those who have understanding. Now, the reason that this is so important is because no matter what um, place that you find yourself in, as an adult or as a teenager, God has ultimate authority in that place. God is sovereign, and nothing happens without His oversight or His allowance. And so, excuse me, uh, um, that's important to understand whenever you're going through something that you don't agree with, because ultimately God has allowed whatever is happening to happen, and it doesn't mean that you always like it, but it does mean that there is a purpose in it, and there is a reason God is allowing it, and God can even use negative circumstances, as we all know, to bring about good. But but in those circumstances, whenever we find ourselves in a place like Daniel was of captivity, having to submit to a ruler that he obviously did not share the same morals or ethics or anything with, he was able to submit and understand that God was in control, and God had even established that authority for a purpose. I mean, God established Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar as agents of wrath and captivity on Israel. Not that they would never be judged for the heinous things that they had done against His people, but God used that foreign power and that foreign government in His purposes. So um, God can give not only rulers wisdom and and knowledge, but you see in this instance, and I think what's applicable for us at this point is that in those situations, God can give us wisdom and knowledge and understanding, not only in the fact that He does have authority and power over these situations, but also in the fact that we can have the ability to speak wisdom and knowledge into those authorities. There is such a thing as leading um, those above you. And that's exactly what Daniel has done in this passage. And if we are willing to submit, God can use us even in the midst of difficulty, for His purposes. But Daniel would not have had that opportunity had he not been willing to submit to the government and authorities in which were over him at the time. So it's very beneficial to us to make sure that they understand that God has the power to use them in in a place that they are at. I can't tell you how many students I've talked to that have teachers at the high school that obviously do not have a biblical worldview. In fact, some of them are even down on Christianity. And I think those are probably the exceptions rather than the rule. But at the same time, those students can be used to speak wisdom and knowledge into the life of that teacher that is over them. Or maybe you've got a situation where you've got a student in class whose parents are not believers, and they have an opportunity as a believer to speak wisdom and knowledge into that situation, into that home, and have an effect or an influence over that home for God, um, because He has placed them there at this time. And so I don't want it being translated that if that's the case, if they have unbelieving parents at home, then they are in captivity. I'm not trying to translate that. I'm just saying they have an opportunity to speak knowledge and wisdom into that situation, and God can use them there just like He used Daniel in Babylon. So I hope that understands a little bit. I hope that helps you understand where I'm coming from or where we're coming from on this lesson. And I think this the first passage in Romans and the passage in Daniel gives us two different aspects, but both of them can work in tandem to speak truth into the life of a teenager and show them how God's word applies to them right now, not whenever they become an adult. It applies to them now and today. So um, you can see we've also discussed several other examples, and I'm not going to go over those with you. I mean, other than just to briefly mention the fact that obviously we know how God used hardship in his life. He used the rulers, and he was able to actually save many people because God had placed him there at that time, and he submitted to those. He submitted to God first and those authorities as well in order to be used by God. Um, we've got David, we've got servants, and the example of Christ, and then the Luke passage talks about Jesus and how um, he was submissive as well. But anyway, that is kind of the book and look portion. I'll let you go over those other ones if you have time and as you wish. But really, we want to key on the Romans passage and the Daniel passage this week and use those other ones if it serves your purposes in your class. So now we're going to move on to the took portion.